Ever completely lose your cool playing sports? I mean, we're talking full-on meltdown mode.
Oh yeah, I've definitely been there.
It's like suddenly you're not even playing the game anymore, just battling your own frustration. That's what we're digging into today, taming those inner tantrums to up your game in tennis or anything.
Love it. It's such a universal struggle, right?
Totally. We're diving into some fascinating research about mastering your emotions on the court, and they use Aryna Sabalenka, amazing tennis player, as a case study.
Interesting. What'd they find?
Well, one thing that struck me was this idea of anger dominoes. You make one mistake and boom, it triggers this whole cascade of negativity. One bad shot leads to another, and suddenly you can't even think straight.
Oh, I've seen that happen a million times, both on and off the court. It's like a snowball effect, right? One little thing goes wrong and it just spirals from there.
Exactly. And it's like the source said, once you're in that spiral, it's so tough to pull yourself back out.
Right. Which is why it's so important to understand what's actually happening in those moments. Like, from a scientific perspective, it's that primal fight-or-flight response kicking in. When we perceive a threat, even if it's just a missed volley, our bodies get flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, basically prepping us to fight or run away.
Wow, so our brains are literally going haywire over a missed shot.
Pretty much. And ironically, that fight-or-flight mode makes it way harder to actually perform well. Your decision-making gets cloudy, fine motor skills go out the window. It's why we choke under pressure.
Makes total sense. So how do we short-circuit that meltdown before it takes over? The source lays out some steps, and the first one is surprisingly simple, just acknowledging that anger is a problem.
It sounds basic, but you'd be surprised how many people never even get that far. They'd rather blame everything else, the weather, their opponent, anything but themselves.
It's so true. It's way easier to make excuses than to own the problem, but the source really hammers home that taking responsibility is crucial.
100%, because if you're always blaming external factors, you never actually address the root cause, which is your own reaction.
Right. It's like blaming the racket for not hitting the ball correctly.
Yep.
It's not the racket's fault. It's the person holding it. And speaking of taking responsibility, that's where Aryna Sabalenka's story comes in. She was notorious for these on-court outbursts earlier in her career, but she went on to win the Australian Open.
Really? That's a huge turnaround. How'd she do it?
She started working with a sports psychologist to specifically address her mental game. What's really cool is that she realized she had to be the one driving her own change. She even said, and this is a direct quote, "At the end, the only one thing that helped me is just myself. Just stop expecting people to fix my problems, start fixing my problems by myself."
Wow, that's powerful. It's that whole taking ownership thing we were just talking about. You can have the best coach in the world, but you're the one out there on the court.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's say you're ready to put in the work, like Sabalenka did. What are some practical techniques for rewiring those emotional responses in the heat of the moment?
Well, one technique I use a lot with my clients is called the between point reset. The idea is to create a conscious pause to interrupt that reactive cycle we talked about, that fight or flight mode. So instead of letting your emotions spiral after a bad shot, you build in this little reset button.
Okay, I like that. How does that actually work during a match?
It could be anything that works for you. Some people take a deep breath. Others have a mental cue they repeat. Some even bounce the ball a specific number of times. It's about finding what helps you personally calm your nervous system and get back into a more mindful headspace.
It's about regaining control, right?
Yeah.
Instead of being ruled by those instant reactions.
Exactly. And the source also talks about identifying your personal triggers, which I think is so key. Like, what sets you off? Is it a certain type of shot, a specific opponent, or maybe just being tired?
Oh my gosh, yes. For me, it's totally that negative self-talk after I make a mistake. Like, ugh, I'm so bad at this. Why do I even bother?
We all have those scripts playing on repeat in our heads. But the good news is you can actually rewrite them. So next time you hit that frustrating shot into the net, instead of going down that rabbit hole of self-criticism, try to catch yourself and reframe it.
So instead of "I'm terrible," it's more like,
Okay, that wasn't my best, but I'm still in this. What adjustment can I make on the next point?
it's about being your own coach, right? Giving yourself constructive feedback instead of just tearing yourself down. But that takes practice, yeah.
Absolutely. But like we saw with Sabalenka, it's 100% possible. And it starts with that awareness, knowing your triggers, and practicing those more helpful responses.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. I mean, if even top athletes like Sabalenka struggle with this stuff, it shows just how powerful it is to master your mind, on or off the court.
Totally. It's a skill that transcends tennis, It's relevant in every aspect of life.
It really makes you think if we can learn to tame those inner tantrums and choose our responses more intentionally, what could we achieve? Something to think about.